The strangest part wasn't the blanket in my bed. It was that I had started expecting it. Emily Carter stood frozen beside the narrow wooden frame of her bed, her fingers tightening around the lantern she carried. The golden light trembled across the small room, casting soft shadows against the stone fireplace and the shelves lined with jars of dried herbs. Nothing in the cottage was out of place. The front door was still locked. The windows were still latched from the inside. The kettle sat exactly where she had left it before falling asleep. Yet there it was. A thick charcoal gray blanket draped neatly across the foot of her bed. Emily stared at it for several long seconds. She lived alone nearly 3 miles from the nearest village. No family. No visitors. No reason for anyone to enter her home. And yet this was not the first strange thing that had happened. Outside, dawn painted the forest in shades of pale silver. The towering pines surrounding her cottage swayed gently in the morning breeze. Usually the sight brought her comfort. Today it only deepened the uneasy feeling settling in her chest. Setting the lantern down, she reached for the blanket. The fabric was surprisingly warm beneath her fingertips. Not the warmth of a room. The warmth of something that had been wrapped around a living body only hours before. Emily swallowed. The blanket was expensive. Far beyond anything owned by the farmers in the village. The stitching was flawless. The material soft and heavy. Whoever it belonged to certainly wasn't poor. A faint scent lingered in the fibers. Pine trees after rain. Winter air. Something clean and wild she couldn't quite place. She pulled her hand back immediately. "This is ridiculous," she whispered to the empty room. The sound of her own voice seemed strangely loud. She folded the blanket carefully and placed it on the chair near the fireplace. Maybe she had forgotten something. Maybe one of the village women had stopped by while she slept. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. But deep down she knew there wasn't. Because the blanket wasn't the only mystery. For weeks now, Emily had noticed small changes around the cottage. Firewood. Stacked neatly by the porch after she had forgotten to chop it. Loose fence boards repaired overnight. Fresh wildflowers appearing in old glass jars outside her door. Tiny acts of kindness with no owner. No explanation. She had searched for footprints before. The forest always erased them before morning. Every answer slipped away the moment she reached for it. The day passed slowly. Emily gathered herbs along the creek and tried to focus on ordinary things. Yet her thoughts kept returning to the blanket waiting inside the cottage. By sunset, clouds drifted across the sky, turning the world soft and blue. Night settled quietly over the forest. Emily sat beside the window with a cup of tea warming her hands. The blanket remained folded nearby. The room was silent. Then it came. A voice. Soft. Distant. Singing. Emily's breath caught instantly. The sound floated through the trees like a dream carried by the wind. Beautiful. Lonely. Familiar. She moved toward the window and slowly pulled back the curtain. Beneath the old apple tree standing 20 yards from her cottage sat a massive white wolf. Moonlight shimmered across its pale fur. Its head tilted toward the stars as the haunting melody drifted from somewhere deep within the stillness of the night. And for reasons she could not explain, Emily felt her heart recognize the song before her mind understood it. Emily remained by the window long after the song faded into silence. The white wolf did not move immediately. It sat beneath the old apple tree as if listening to something only it could hear. Moonlight painted its fur silver, making it seem less like a creature of the forest and more like a memory that had wandered out of a dream. She should have been afraid. Any sensible person would have closed the curtains, locked the door, and stayed far away from a wolf that large. Yet fear was not what she felt. Curiosity settled inside her instead, warm and persistent. The wolf finally rose to its feet and disappeared between the trees. Only then did Emily release the breath she had been holding. The next morning, she stepped outside expecting to find the forest exactly as she had left it. Instead, she stopped halfway. Down the porch steps. A neat stack of freshly split firewood rested beside the wall of the cottage. She stared at it in disbelief. The pile had not been there the evening before. Emily approached slowly and touched one of the logs. The wood was dry and cleanly cut. Whoever had done this knew exactly what they were doing. She looked around the clearing. The forest answered with silence. The nearest neighbor lived more than 2 miles away. Nobody came out here without a reason. Yet someone clearly had. Her gaze drifted toward the apple tree. For a moment she considered walking over and inspecting the ground beneath it. Instead, she shook her head and returned inside. By afternoon, a light rain began to fall. Gray clouds rolled across the sky, turning the forest dark hours before sunset. Emily spent most of the evening reading beside the fireplace, but she found herself glancing toward the window every few minutes. The blanket remained folded on the chair. Somehow its presence made the cottage feel different. Less empty, more mysterious. When darkness finally settled outside, she extinguished most of the lamps and waited. She told herself she was not expecting anything. She was simply enjoying the sound of the rain. Yet when the first distant notes reached her ears, she was already standing. The song seemed softer tonight. Closer somehow. Emily crossed the room and carefully pulled back the curtain. Her heart immediately skipped a beat. The wolf had returned. Rain soaked its pale fur as it sat beneath the apple tree. Unlike the night before, it looked exhausted. Its head hung lower. Its posture lacked the quiet confidence she remembered. Even from 20 yards away, she could sense a strange weariness about it. The melody drifted through the rain, beautiful but fragile. Emily frowned. The weather was getting worse. Wind rattled the branches overhead. Thunder murmured somewhere beyond the mountains. Still the wolf remained outside. Minutes passed. Then the singing stopped. The wolf lowered itself onto the wet ground beneath the tree. It did not leave. Emily watched another 10 minutes pass. Then 20. The animal never moved. Concern slowly replaced caution. Before she could change her mind, she grabbed her lantern and stepped onto the porch. Cool rain kissed her cheeks. The wolf lifted its head as she approached but made no effort to retreat. Golden eyes met hers across the darkness. Strange eyes, Emily thought. Intelligent eyes. Tired eyes. She stopped several feet away. Neither of them moved. Then, feeling slightly foolish, she carried the charcoal gray blanket from inside the cottage and gently placed it over the wolf's shoulders. For a brief second, the animal seemed startled. Its ears twitched. Its gaze softened. Emily offered a small smile. "You cannot stay out here all night," she whispered. The wolf blinked slowly as if it understood every word. Then she stepped back and returned to the warmth of her cottage. Long after she climbed into bed, she found herself wondering why the thought of that lonely creature sitting beneath the rain felt strangely familiar, as though some forgotten part of her heart had been waiting for him long before she ever heard his song. The next morning, Emily woke before sunrise. For a few quiet seconds she lay still beneath her quilt, listening to the familiar sounds of the forest. Wind moved gently through the pines. Somewhere in the distance, a creek murmured over smooth stones. Then she remembered the wolf. She sat up immediately and looked toward the window. Pale morning light spilled across the room. The apple tree stood motionless beyond the glass. The wolf was gone. Emily pulled on her boots and stepped outside. The air smelled fresh after the night's rain. Small droplets clung to every blade of grass. Her eyes moved instinctively toward the place beneath the tree. The charcoal gray blanket was gone as well. She should have felt relieved. Instead, disappointment settled quietly in her chest. It was a strange reaction. She barely understood it herself. Over the following days, life returned to its ordinary rhythm, at least on the surface. Emily gathered herbs from the forest, tended the small vegetable garden behind the cottage, and delivered dried remedies to the village twice a week. Yet every evening, as sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and lavender, she found herself glancing toward the old apple tree, waiting. On the fourth night, the song returned. Emily nearly dropped the book she was reading when the first notes drifted through the open window. A smile appeared before she could stop it. She crossed the room and looked outside. The white wolf sat exactly where it always did. Moonlight glowed across its fur. Its eyes seemed brighter tonight, more alert, somehow healthier. The melody floated through the darkness, filling the clearing with a strange sense of peace. Emily opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. This time she did not hide behind the curtains. The wolf paused briefly during its song and turned its head toward her. For a moment neither moved. Then the melody resumed. Emily lowered herself into the rocking chair beside the door and listened. The hours slipped by unnoticed. It became their routine after that. Every night the wolf appeared. Every night the song followed. Some evenings Emily spoke softly into the darkness, telling stories about her day even though she knew how ridiculous it sounded. She spoke about stubborn weeds in the garden, about a neighbor whose chickens constantly escaped their fence, about the books she loved reading during stormy weather. The wolf never answered, yet somehow she felt heard. One morning she discovered fresh flowers resting on the porch steps. Wildflowers gathered from deep within the forest where few people ever traveled. The next day, a broken hinge on her garden gate had been repaired. 2 mornings later, she found a basket of ripe apples sitting beside the door despite the fact that the local harvest was still weeks away. Emily laughed quietly as she carried them inside. Whoever was responsible was becoming less subtle. Yet the mystery only deepened. As autumn slowly approached, the cottage no longer felt lonely. The silence that had once filled every corner seemed replaced by anticipation. Every evening carried the promise of another song. Every morning brought the possibility of another unexplained gift. Emily could not explain why the changes mattered so much. She only knew one thing. On the rare nights when clouds covered the moon and the singer failed to appear, the forest felt strangely empty. And so did she. Nearly 50 miles away, beyond the endless forests and rolling hills, the royal capital stood beneath a crown of stone towers and silver banners. It was a place of power, tradition, and constant movement. Yet inside the highest tower of Blackwood Palace, one man stared out into the darkness with growing frustration. Adrian Blackwood had not slept through an entire night in months. The Alpha King stood beside the tall window of his private chambers, his reflection faintly visible in the glass. Dark hair brushed the collar of his black coat. Silver eyes watched the moon rise above the distant mountains. He looked calm from a distance. Few people ever saw otherwise. But exhaustion lived behind his gaze. A quiet knock sounded at the door. "Enter," Adrian said. The door opened immediately. His longtime advisor, Nathan Hale, stepped inside carrying several reports. "Your Majesty, the council meeting begins in 40 minutes. Adrian nodded without turning. Nathan hesitated. "You should rest." A faint smile touched Adrian's lips. "That suggestion becomes less useful every day." Nathan placed the documents on a nearby desk. "The physicians are concerned. The physicians are always concerned. You woke up in the Eastern Gardens yesterday morning." Adrian finally turned toward him. "I am aware." Nathan lowered his voice. 3 days before that, you were found asleep beside the royal stables. Last week, the guards discovered you near the southern gate." Adrian's expression darkened slightly. The advisor was not telling him anything he did not already know. Every morning brought another mystery, another unexplained location, another blank space in his memory. He would go to bed in his chambers and wake somewhere entirely different. No witnesses. No answers. Only confusion. The physicians called it exhaustion. The scholars blamed ancient magic. The priests insisted the moon was testing him. Adrian trusted none of their explanations. He only knew one thing. Every night he dreamed of music. The same melody. The same voice. The same feeling of longing he could never fully remember after waking. It lingered like sunlight after closing one's eyes. Familiar. Comforting. Impossible to grasp. Nathan studied him carefully. "Did you dream again?" Adrian looked away. "Yes. The woman." Silence filled the room for a moment. "I never see her face," Adrian admitted. "Only a cottage." Nathan blinked. "A cottage? A small one?" Adrian moved toward the fireplace. Stone chimney. White curtains. An apple tree. The details arrived effortlessly despite the dream itself remaining blurred. "And the song?" Nathan asked. Adrian frowned. "I hear it every night." The advisor folded his arms thoughtfully. "Perhaps it means something. Or perhaps I simply need sleep." But even as Adrian spoke, he knew that explanation no longer satisfied him. The dreams felt too real. More real than dreams should. They stayed with him throughout the day. They followed him into meetings, into ceremonies, into every quiet moment when his mind drifted. Later that evening, after the council meetings finally ended, Adrian returned to his chambers. Outside, the moon hung full and bright above the kingdom. A strange sense of anticipation settled over him. He did not understand it. He only knew it was growing stronger, as though something beyond the palace walls was calling him. Somewhere deep in the forest, beneath an old apple tree, a cottage waited in the darkness. And though Adrian Blackwood had never consciously seen it before, part of him already knew the way. 3 nights later, the first frost of the season arrived. A thin layer of silver covered the grass surrounding Emily's cottage, sparkling beneath the morning sun. She wrapped a wool sweater around herself and stepped outside with a basket in hand, planning to gather herbs before the colder weather settled in for good. She barely made it halfway across the clearing before something caught her eye. A dark shape rested beneath the apple tree. Emily slowed her steps. At first she assumed it was another gift, perhaps a basket of apples or a bundle of firewood. But as she moved closer, she realized it was neither. It was a folded piece of fabric. Her heartbeat quickened. Kneeling beside it, she carefully lifted the material. It was not a blanket this time. It appeared to be part of a cloak. Thick black wool lined with silver stitching so intricate it almost seemed woven by hand. Emily ran her fingers along the edge. This was not something owned by a farmer, nor a merchant. The craftsmanship alone suggested wealth. Her gaze caught on a symbol embroidered near one corner. A silver wolf surrounded by a ring of stars. Emily frowned. The design felt familiar. She knew she had seen it somewhere before. She simply could not remember where. Taking the cloak fragment inside, she laid it across the kitchen table. The silver thread glimmered softly in the sunlight pouring through the window. The symbol continued to bother her throughout the day. By evening she finally remembered. The village postmaster kept old newspapers from the capital stacked near the front counter. Months ago she had noticed the same emblem printed beside a royal announcement. The royal crest. Emily sat perfectly still. Her eyes returned to the silver wolf stitched into the fabric. That was impossible. The royal family lived nearly 50 miles away. Why would a piece of royal clothing appear beneath her apple tree? Her thoughts drifted immediately toward the white wolf. The idea sounded absurd. Yet she could not ignore the growing list of impossible things surrounding the mysterious visitor. That night the air turned colder than usual. Wind rattled against the cottage walls while clouds drifted across the moon. Emily sat by the fireplace waiting. An hour passed. Then another. No song came. No white wolf appeared beneath the tree. For the first time in weeks, the clearing remained empty. Emily told herself not to worry. It was only one night. Yet sleep refused to come easily. She woke several times before dawn and glanced toward the window each time. The apple tree remained alone. The following day brought heavy gray skies and a sharp northern wind. By evening snowflakes drifted through the forest. Emily found herself checking the clearing every few minutes. The absence felt wrong. Like a missing note in a familiar melody. Night settled across the woods. Hours passed. Then, just as Emily began accepting that the singer would not come, she heard something. Not music. A distant sound carried by the wind. A soft whimper. Emily stood immediately. The sound came again. Faint. Weak. Somewhere beyond the tree line. She grabbed her lantern without hesitation. Snow swirled through the darkness as she stepped into the forest. The sound guided her deeper between the pines. 100 yards. Then 200. Finally the lantern light revealed a pale shape lying beneath a cluster of evergreen branches. Emily's breath caught. The white wolf had returned. But this time it was not singing. It was asleep, curled tightly against the cold earth while snow slowly gathered across its fur. And draped awkwardly beneath one shoulder was a torn piece of black fabric, embroidered with a silver wolf surrounded by stars. Emily dropped to her knees beside the sleeping wolf. Snowflakes settled across her hair and shoulders, melting against the warmth of her skin. Up close, the animal looked even larger than she remembered. Its pale fur was dusted with white, blending almost perfectly into the winter landscape. Yet what caught her attention was not its size. It was how exhausted it seemed. The wolf barely reacted when she touched its shoulder. Normally its golden eyes would open immediately. Tonight there was only a faint movement of its ears. "Hey," Emily whispered softly. "You cannot stay out here." The wolf lifted its head slightly. Its eyes opened halfway before closing again. Emily felt a knot tighten in her chest. Whatever had happened, The journey through the storm had clearly taken more out of it than usual. Her lantern cast a warm circle of light across the snow. That was when she noticed something else. The torn black fabric attached to the wolf was not simply lying beneath it. It appeared caught around one of its legs, tangled awkwardly after being ripped away from something larger. Carefully, Emily freed the material and examined it more closely. The silver crest gleamed beneath the lantern light. There was no mistaking it now. It belonged to the royal household. Her pulse quickened. Questions crowded her thoughts. How had the wolf come into possession of royal clothing? Why did it keep appearing at her cottage? Why did? Every answer seemed to create 10 more mysteries. A cold gust of wind swept through the trees. The wolf shivered. Emily immediately made her decision. You are coming with me. The words sounded ridiculous the moment she said them. The animal probably weighed as much as she did. Yet somehow, after several patient attempts and plenty of encouragement, she managed to coax it to its feet. The wolf moved slowly beside her as they made their way back toward the cottage. Snow continued falling around them. By the time they reached the clearing, Emily's cheeks were red from the cold and her boots were soaked through. Inside, the cottage felt wonderfully warm. She added more wood to the fireplace while the wolf settled onto a thick rug near the hearth. Orange firelight danced across its pale coat. For the first time, Emily saw it relax completely. The tension seemed to leave its body. Its eyes drifted closed. She could not help smiling. There. Much better. The wolf watched her quietly for a few moments before lowering its head onto its paws. Emily hung the torn royal fabric near the fireplace to dry. Then she prepared a bowl of water and placed it nearby. To her surprise, the wolf accepted both comforts without hesitation, as though it trusted her completely. Hours passed. Outside, the storm grew stronger. Wind rattled against the windows while snow piled high around the cottage. Emily sat in her favorite chair reading a book. Every so often she glanced toward the rug beside the fire. The wolf remained asleep. Peaceful. Safe. Somewhere after midnight, fatigue finally pulled at her eyes. She closed her book and stood. The wolf did not wake as she draped the familiar charcoal gray blanket over its shoulders once more. "Good night," she whispered. A strange expression crossed its face. Not quite a smile. Not quite understanding. Something in between. Emily climbed the stairs to the loft above the main room and soon drifted into sleep. Several hours later, a sound woke her. Not the wind. Not the storm. A voice. Deep. Quiet. Unfamiliar. Emily. Her eyes opened instantly. The voice had come from downstairs. For one stunned second she thought she must still be dreaming. Then, it came again. Soft as a breath. Emily. She sat upright in bed. Below her, the fire continued crackling in the darkness. And somewhere inside the cottage, someone had just spoken her name. Emily sat frozen in bed. Every trace of sleep gone. The cottage had become so quiet that she could hear the faint crackle of burning wood downstairs. Her pulse echoed loudly in her ears. For several seconds she wondered if she had imagined the voice. The storm outside continued to howl softly against the walls. Perhaps it had been the wind. Perhaps her dreams had followed her into waking. Then she heard it again. This time it was little more than a murmur. Emily. The sound came from below. Not from outside. Not from the forest. From inside her cottage. A chill raced down her spine. Slowly, she climbed out of bed and stepped toward the loft railing. Firelight flickered across the room beneath her. Shadows danced along the walls. At first everything appeared exactly as she had left it. Then she noticed the rug beside the fireplace. Empty. The white wolf was gone. Emily gripped the railing tighter. Her eyes moved across the room. The chair near the window. The kitchen table. The staircase. Nothing. Then her breath caught. A man sat on the floor beside the hearth. For a moment her mind refused to understand what she was seeing. He appeared to be sleeping, leaning against the stone fireplace with his head tilted slightly forward. Dark hair fell across his forehead. The charcoal gray blanket remained draped around his shoulders. Firelight illuminated strong features and pale skin. He looked no older than his early 30s, tall even while seated, broad-shouldered, completely unfamiliar. Yet something about him felt impossibly familiar at the same time. Emily stared in stunned silence. The man shifted slightly in his sleep. His lips moved. Emily. Her name again. Soft and unconscious. The sound settled every question and created 100 more. She should have been frightened. A stranger had somehow appeared inside her home during the middle of the night. Instead, she found herself descending the stairs almost without thinking. Each step creaked beneath her weight. The man did not wake. When she reached the bottom, she stopped several feet away. The blanket around his shoulders slipped slightly. Emily immediately recognized it. The same blanket she had placed over the wolf countless times. Her gaze dropped toward the floor. There, resting beside him, lay the torn fragment of royal fabric embroidered with silver thread. Her heart pounded. Piece by piece, the impossible puzzle began fitting together. The wolf, the gifts, the songs, the royal crest, the dreams she had never understood. Emily slowly lowered herself into the chair nearest the fire. She watched him for what felt like hours. At some point, the storm outside faded. Snow no longer tapped against the windows. Dawn slowly approached. The first pale light of morning filtered through the curtains. Finally, the man stirred. His eyes opened. Silver. Not gray. Not blue. True silver. The same impossible shade she had seen reflected in the moonlight so many nights before. Confusion crossed his face immediately. He looked around the cottage. The fireplace. The table. The curtains. Then his gaze landed on Emily. Both of them froze. For several seconds neither spoke. The stranger looked as bewildered as she felt. His eyes widened slightly. Where am I? Emily swallowed. My cottage. The man blinked. Your cottage. His voice was calm but clearly confused. He looked down at the blanket around his shoulders. Then toward the unfamiliar room surrounding him. I do not remember coming here. Emily's heart skipped. She already knew the answer before she asked. What is your name? The stranger hesitated. Then he replied quietly. Adrian. And suddenly every mystery in the forest became far more complicated than either of them could imagine. For the rest of the morning, neither Emily nor Adrian seemed to know what to say. Sunlight gradually filled the cottage, turning the frost on the windows into tiny streams of water. The storm had passed. Outside, the forest looked peaceful again. Inside, the silence felt much heavier. Adrian sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea between his hands. Emily watched him from across the room. The longer she looked, the more impossible everything seemed. This was the man who appeared in every newspaper that reached the village. The ruler whose decisions shaped the entire kingdom. The Alpha King himself sat in her cottage wearing her blanket and looking completely confused. Adrian stared into the steam rising from the cup. I owe you an explanation. Emily gave a small laugh. I think you do. A faint smile touched his face before disappearing. The problem is that I do not fully understand it myself. He looked toward the window. For months I have been waking up in places I do not remember traveling to. Emily remained silent. Every night I fall asleep in the palace, Adrian continued. Every morning I wake somewhere else. His expression darkened slightly. The physicians called it exhaustion. The scholars blamed old magic. Nobody could explain why it kept happening. Emily thought of the songs beneath the apple tree, the gifts left on her porch, the wolf sleeping beside her fireplace. Suddenly none of it felt random anymore. You were dreaming, she said softly. Adrian's eyes met hers. What? Emily hesitated. You said my name while you were asleep. Something changed in his expression. Surprise first, then recognition, then something deeper. Emily. He repeated it quietly as though testing the sound. I know that name. Her heartbeat quickened. Adrian leaned back slowly. Every dream begins the same way. His voice had become distant. A cottage in the woods. White curtains. An apple tree. Emily felt her breath catch. And someone is always there. The room seemed to grow smaller. A woman, she asked. Adrian nodded. I never saw her face clearly. Only pieces. Her voice. Her laugh. He looked directly at her. The feeling that I had finally found where I belonged. Neither spoke for several seconds. Outside, sunlight glittered across the fresh snow. The entire world seemed suspended between one moment and the next. Then Adrian's gaze drifted toward the folded royal cloak resting near the fireplace. There is something else. Emily followed his eyes. The crest. He nodded. My family carries an old bond. His voice lowered. Long ago, before the kingdom existed, the first Alpha Kings made a promise to the moon goddess. Emily listened carefully. The bond does not awaken often. Sometimes generations pass without it appearing. But when it does, the wolf knows before the person does. A strange warmth spread through her chest. What does that mean? Adrian smiled sadly. It means that while I spent months searching for answers, my wolf already knew exactly where it wanted to be. The words settled gently between them. Emily thought about every night beneath the apple tree. Every song. Every gift. Every unexplained act of kindness. None of it had been an accident. None of it had been random. Adrian looked down at the blanket around his shoulders. His fingers brushed the familiar fabric. I think my wolf found you long before I ever understood why. And for the first time since the mystery began, Emily realized that the songs had never been calls of loneliness. They had been the sound of someone finding their way home. Winter settled fully over the forest during the weeks that followed. Snow covered the roof of Emily's cottage in a blanket of white, and the branches of the old apple tree glittered beneath the pale afternoon sun. Life should have felt different after the truth was revealed. In some ways it did. Yet in other ways the most important things remained exactly the same. Adrian continued visiting the cottage. Only now he arrived through the front door instead of waking beside the fireplace with no memory of how he had gotten there. The first few visits felt almost unreal. Emily would glance out the window and see the Alpha King walking up the snowy path carrying firewood or supplies from the village. Every time, part of her still expected to wake from the strange dream her life had become. But she never did. Slowly, the mystery that had brought them together transformed into something quieter. Something steadier. They spent long evenings talking beside the fire. Adrian told stories about places beyond the mountains Emily had never seen. Emily shared memories of growing up in the forest and learning the names of every wildflower that bloomed along the creek. Neither seemed eager for the conversations to end. One afternoon, nearly a month after the storm, a group of royal riders appeared outside the cottage. Emily watched from the porch as several men in dark cloaks approached. Their expressions shifted immediately when they saw Adrian standing beside her carrying a basket of apples. Surprise turned to relief. Nathan Hale climbed from his horse first. Your Majesty, he said carefully. Adrian sighed. I was wondering how long it would take you to find me. Nathan's eyes moved toward Emily. Understanding slowly appeared on his face. For a moment he looked as though dozens of unanswered questions had suddenly received the same answer. So this is why, he said quietly. Adrian smiled. Yes. Nathan glanced toward the apple tree, then toward the cottage. Finally he laughed softly. The entire kingdom has been searching for a solution, while your wolf solved the problem months ago. Even Adrian could not argue with that. After the riders departed, silence returned to the clearing. Snow drifted gently through the air. Emily stood beside the porch railing watching the fading sunlight. Will everything change now? She asked. Adrian stepped beside her. Some things will. His silver eyes reflected the golden colors of sunset. But not the things that matter. Emily looked at him. The answer settled warmly inside her heart. Weeks later, on the first clear night of spring, the forest finally began to wake from winter. Tiny buds appeared on the apple tree. The air smelled of fresh earth instead of snow. Emily stood outside beneath a sky full of stars. The cottage windows glowed softly behind her. Adrian joined her a few moments later. Neither spoke immediately. There was no need. The silence between them had long since become comfortable, peaceful, familiar. Then Adrian looked toward the old apple tree and smiled. You know, he said, I thought I was losing my mind every night. Emily laughed softly. And now? He looked at her. The same way he had looked at her from beneath moonlight long before he understood why. Now I know I was only finding my way home. Somewhere in the darkness, a gentle breeze moved through the trees. And for the first time since the songs began, neither loneliness nor mystery remained. Only the quiet certainty that sometimes destiny arrives softly, carrying a familiar melody through the night until two hearts finally learn how to recognize it.